This is a crisis of the soul and the heart. And that, I think, longer term could lead to a real reassessment of who we are and what we want. The cracks have opened up and you can start to push things through. But suddenly there's that possibility there to make radical change.
Hello, it's so wonderful to be here with you at this time of the equinox, or whenever this conversation finds you. Before I introduce you to this week's guest, I have to share with you that this is the last chance to join our new program, the Beautiful Leadership Immersion. We have a wonderful group that is coming together, and the doors close on Monday, the 28th of September. If this calls to you, there are still a few days to join us. We are the leaders of the future. And this time together, from the equinox to the solstice, will be a powerful container for us to turn the insights of 2020 into action in your own life and communities. This is our time to understand our part in the puzzle, grow in our commitment, resilience, and confidence, and live lives that shape our future culture in a way that is beautiful and regenerative. The start of the program is all about setting up rituals and practices that will support you through the process, as well as understanding where you're at. Then, the core themes we're exploring are redefining leadership and worth, shadows, trauma and liberation, sacred activism and decolonization, embodiment and biohacking, vision, intuition and edge walking, creativity, cultural futurism, and flow consciousness. And we'll finish with collaboration and community. It's this intertwined weave of inner transformation with systemic change. We explore how to really listen and find our call to action amongst and amidst all the complexity with which we live. We adventure into how to see beauty and find the possibility in the space we find ourselves in the place we find ourselves in, and in the inner reality that we find ourselves in. We have 13 amazing guest teacher appearances from people who have been on the podcast and Dr. Melissa Sterry, who will be on later this season. The 12 guests you already know are Uma Dinsmore-Tooley, Tiu Dehan, Swati Martin, Stephanie Mines, Sienna Sherman, Sally Kempton, Nina Simons, Jyoti, Indra Adnan, Anna-Greta Folderback, Alan Moore, and Ed Gillespie, who is mentioned quite a bit in this conversation. Let's seize the possibility of 2020 together. You can find out more by going to the courses page on our website, www.thefutureisbeautiful.co. My guest today is Mark Stevenson, who describes himself as a reluctant futurist. He is an author, broadcaster, and expert on global trends and innovation. The author of 2 best-selling books, An Optimist Tour of the Future, and the award-winning We Do Things Differently. TED curator Chris Anderson describes Mark as a man with no blindfold, whose tools are curiosity, open-mindedness, clarity, and reason. While Sir Tim Smith, founder of the Eden Project, hails his work as a feast of ingenuity and an incitement to genuinely think. As such, he is one of the world's most respected thinkers on the interplay of technology and society, helping a diverse mix of clients from government departments to corporates to NGOs become future literate and adapt their cultures and strategy to squarely face the questions the future is asking them, or die gracefully if they need to. In this conversation, called Futurenaut Sailing with the Compass of Change, we explore the themes of systemic change, fitness, and perseverance as we contemplate the question, can we condition ourselves to become progressive vessels that forge a regenerative future? I hope this episode moves you into action, health, and resilience. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop, and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Mark, it is a delight to welcome you to The Future is Beautiful. Thank you for being here.
Having me.
So I guess my first question is around the possibility that you are sensing at this particular time that we're in.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's a question.
Well, it is, because you could say there isn't any. You could say
there's always a number of possibilities. I mean, I define myself as a possibilist. So there are a range of possibilities for the future, which range from the absolutely catastrophic to the potentially amazing. I suppose I've dedicated my life to try and do my bit to up the chances of the latter rather than the former. I mean, right now it's all very problematic. Just this morning on the news, massive ice sheet broken off from Greenland. The thermodynamics of climate change are particularly worrying. We have the retreat of democracy. We have mass inequality, whether that's income or gender or racial. The press in free countries, if they're so-called that, that's supposed to hold that to account, doesn't really work very well. The education system seems to be stuck in the 1950s. And the markets have priced risk very badly. I'm not sure who said it, but markets make great servants, but they make terrible masters. So we have this whole, and that's, and then we have a pandemic, and that's a result of largely our inability to function in a useful and respectful way with the environment. The loss of biodiversity is enormous. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So it's quite interesting to be somebody who's trying to make the future when there's so much falling apart around our ears. But one must, otherwise you just accept that it's going to get worse, and you can't do that.
Yeah, I think everyone listening to this is wanting to live their lives in a way where they're not just resigned to doom and gloom, in which case, why would you even bother getting out of bed in the morning? We are humans and we're alive now. Of course, we have to see what's possible within the environment in which we live. And this is where we are right now.
Yes, absolutely. And every ton of carbon that's kept out of the atmosphere is a victory. Even if it's not enough, it's still a victory somewhere. The idea is to try and steer it as much in a positive direction as you can. And even if it doesn't end up particularly positive, it's at least less negative than it was. And it is a real battle to find sometimes your own motivation to stay happy and useful and present when there's so much going on. I mean, I'm doing quite a lot of work with trying to get military forces around the world to cooperate at the moment on climate change, which means I'm party to reading quite a lot of military analyses, which are very detailed and very competent and very unapologetic in their analysis of both the actual physical and climate risk, but also the geopolitical risks that come with that as well. And so that's why I do what I do, because, we've got a job on, haven't we? Try and make the world a better place.
And how do you stay motivated?
It just seems like the most sensible thing to do, really. There's a lot that needs to be fixed. I have been born into a degree of privilege, and my personal view is that when it comes to fixing this stuff, it's the privileged that should do the heavy lifting, because they can. I was asked recently in an interview, what was your big break? And I think they were expected to say my first book or whatever. And I said my big break was I was born white, male, out of poverty, into a family that loved me in peacetime, in a country with a vaguely functioning government. What more do you want as a lottery in life? So I won the lottery, and therefore it's not like lots of people ask me this, and it's not really a particularly spiritual calling or whatever. It just seems like the most obvious thing to do, that I have some abilities and some talents, and there's a lot of big problems that need solving, so I might as well get in and do my bit. It's very prosaic, kind of like, that needs fixing, let's have a go. I think my grandfather was quite a senior ranking engineer, and I think maybe some of that's just rubbed off on me. Just look at it as an engineering problem. Okay, what can we do to solve it?
What about in terms of, because you said it's a challenge to stay like happy, and that was sort of from your words. So I guess I'm curious as to like what you do in your life that helps you with that aspect of it, because it's also very easy. I've worked in social change, social entrepreneurship, or activism for many, many years. And it is very easy to get completely like carried away in it as well, where you sort of lose all balance. And without being able to really like renew your own spirit, you can get burnt out. I mean, it's a common casualty of those that are in this kind of work. And so what is it that helps to keep you grounded and able to keep giving?
That's a very interesting question. It's one I've battled with a lot. I now say to people quite a lot, I said, if you can't be kind to yourself, you can't be kind to the rest of the world. You have to sort of look after yourself. And so I have a number of things. And I'm still working on this. My wife will tell you that, I'm often sort of carrying quite a burden on my shoulders. I've just read some, climate analysis from the MOD or whatever. But the first thing is physical fitness. I work out now 6-7 times a week. And I find that's incredibly useful in changing my mood. And I've changed my diet as well. And so it's taken me a long time, like to, my middle age, to work out the bleeding obvious, which is, your diet and whatever have a large impact on your mental state. And so I've just, I've done that, and I like to cook. And then I'm very blessed with an incredible partner who is many of the things that I'm not, and grounds me and helps me through, some of that stuff. I'm forever grateful that A, I found her, and B, she's decided to hang around and have 2 kids with me. And of course, they are great because, one's 4 and one's 18 months, and they're certainly not going to talk about geopolitical risk. They're going to talk about Thomas the Tank Engine, and that helps quite a lot. And then I also have a side career as a musician and a comedy writer. So I wrote a play that toured a couple of years ago. I have a record deal, and that takes me away from this stuff, although I tend to end up writing about all the stuff that's in the day job. So there's that, really. But and the other thing, of course, is the wonderful drug that is alcohol. I'm a big fan of a rather long glass of red wine because I find that takes me into the moment, and I'm just talking nonsense with my friends. And I find actually sitting down and having a good meal and a few glasses of wine is also particularly good. So nothing particularly, spiritual. Again, it's all very practical and prosaic, I'm afraid.
You don't have to be afraid. It doesn't have to be a spiritual answer. What do I do? For me, meditation and yoga really help me. I am more spiritual in my nature. So if I'm connected to like something that feels much bigger than myself, then I have a lot more energy. When I'm in my story of like, I'm Amisha and I'm this many years old and I do this and I do that, then I find that I have less available to me. So that's a big part of it. And singing, singing around the house, in the shower, singing with friends, and community I find really helpful, from like the silly friendships where you can laugh a lot and where you can cry. I'm really grateful for the friends that I can just phone up and just cry at and just be like, oh, like, and allow like that energy to kind of move through, those emotions to move through. And it's always the same stuff, isn't it? It's like getting into our bodies.
You've reminded me of 2 things, actually. Sort of the problem is also its own answer. And you say about being connected to something bigger than yourself, and we both do work that's about something bigger than ourselves. And the best definition of happiness I've ever come across was something I learned from Daniel Dennett, the philosopher. He said, the best definition of happiness I've ever come across is find something more important than you and dedicate your life to it. And that gives you a kind of I watched my father do a job he didn't like for years and years and years. He ended up with, huge mental health problems and anxiety and whatever, because he thought he was doing the right thing for his family by putting, food on the table. But actually it was destroying his soul because he was working in a job that had no meaning for him. And so whilst there's a lot of pressure that comes with, some of the work that we do, there is also a massive benefit, which is when you go to bed at night, you at least feel you're doing something useful. And that has a massive, I think, mental benefit to it. And the other thing that you remind me of about relationships, which is probably why I like to have a drink and have a meal and cook a meal and whatever, is that the biggest indicator from the medical profession of whether you live a long and healthy life is how socialized you are. It's not whether you quit smoking or have an improved diet or do more exercise. All those things are good. They all have a positive effect. But actually the biggest effect on longevity and a healthy longevity is the quality of your social relationships, both the close ones and indeed in your community, which you also mentioned. I tried to get out and about. Of course, that's been both good and bad in the pandemic, because some ways you can do it more And in some ways, you're kind of restricted from doing that. So yes. So we're in violent agreement, I think.
Yeah, and it's funny because you said that you're not spiritual, but then you talk about soul and like doing something that a job that is good for your soul, that like is in resonant with your soul rather than that destroys your soul. And to me, that is like a kind of a spiritual aspect. If you understand that you have a soul, then you are, and you're wanting to honor that journey of your soul in the way that you live. So I guess we're kind of in agreement there too. Well, I do a lot of work around leadership. And for me, a lot of that is around like leading from your soul rather than leading from your ego, and kind of being able to make that distinction, being able to know yourself on different levels and actually be able to tune into like, what is it that creates that sense of like satisfaction, or like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It might still be challenging. It might still be hard, but I can feel it in a place inside of myself. It's kind of common sense, but then I guess that's also what is talked about in a lot of the spiritual texts and communities as well. So, I mean, I think that we have a tendency to label things when they're actually all very like human and universal.
Yes, it's interesting what you're saying there, because it reminded me of, so again, I approach this in a particularly prosaic and the language I use is very prosaic. I do quite a lot of mentoring of people, and particularly young people come to me, because quite a lot of people want to do my job for some reason, even though I don't know what my job is. But they say, how do I get your job? And I say, I don't know how I got it, so I can't help you. But one of the questions I do ask them is, if I gave you £1 billion, what would you do? What you're doing there is you're kind of just removing from them any possible financial strain for them and for anybody they care about, if you want. And it's a thought exercise, because obviously giving somebody £1 billion comes with all sorts of other problems. But just imagine if I gave you £1 billion, what you do. It's really interesting what people say. Then they'll say, well, I'm really concerned about climate change. I'd like to sort of work there. I'd like to be a climate scientist, or I'd like to, join a climate activist movement, or, I'm concerned about human rights, or, I really want to be a painter. Then when I'm working with them, I just go, well, let's work out how you can do that anyway without the £1 billion. What's the next step that brings you closer to doing that thing anyway, rather than always waiting to do it? You have to just get in and start doing it. Somebody once asked me that question back. They said, what would you do if I gave you £1 billion? And I said, I'd do what I'm doing now, but faster. That felt good. It's like, oh yeah, I'm probably doing the right thing. And that, for me, whatever my calling is, I seem to be in it. And then that's also quite disappointing, because then you can go, oh, is this it? I thought I was going to be Bono.
Well, surely within doing what you're doing now, your music would be taking off more with the marketing budgets you'd have, no?
Well, I mean, I've got a record deal with my great friend Ian Farragut, who's a much more talented musician and writer than I am. But our first album did very well in terms of critical success, and we're desperately trying to write the second one, but I'm too busy. So I get a bit of that anyway, which is nice. To come back to I think more in line with our conversation, one of the reasons I keep up the comedy writing and the music is A, I enjoy it when I get time to do it properly. But B, I have this very firm belief that the brain does the PR for what the heart has already decided. And therefore learning the skills of, whether it's Stevie Wonder or Richard Pryor or whoever, to talk to the heart first and foremost and connect to that is really important. I use those skills in the boardroom more than I would use any technical skills. It's like, how am I going to get the person to feel differently so that they will move that £1 billion over to sustainable development, for instance? And often that's using humour, or it's using a turn of phrase that you might have learned from years of trying to write lyrics that really hit the spot. So it's very important to keep that kind of artistic, emotional literacy up. Having said that, my wife will tell you I'm probably one of the least emotionally literate people she's ever met. But from a technical point of view, I know how to do it, but maybe not personally.
Right. But had you not have embarked on music, then you might have been way, way worse than you are now. So there you go. I
certainly was way, way worse in the past. So it's certainly been.
Yeah. And sorry, not to judge how bad we've just met, so I don't know. That wasn't a judgment on how emotionally in tune you are. And actually, just that point that you made around how social we are and how that impacts our health more than anything. And I guess this is something that I'm finding really worrying about the pandemic, because I've been very isolated during this time, because I've been supporting my parents and they've been shielding. And so I have been able to connect a lot through the windows of Zoom. And then there's something really nice about that and really global about that. And it's meant things like friends have been having baby showers on Zoom, which has meant that I've been able to go to my friend's baby shower in Rome when I wouldn't have obviously gone to Rome to go to a baby shower. There are aspects like that of where we've been able to be more included with each other. And a lot of people are finding in local community that they're getting to know their neighbours a lot more because they're kind of seeing each other out and about more without people commuting and leaving the area, that when you go to the shop and when you go for your exercise, that you're bumping into the same people and relationships are building there. But with the rules as they are, that groups can gather for business but not socially, and women aren't allowed to have families with them when they're giving birth and having miscarriages and all kinds of things in hospital, like a lot of things where we really do need that social contact and that very physical social contact. And so I don't know, I find it a bit scary at the moment that we don't know when that will open up again, and if it will ever open up again in the same way, that we might just feel very comfortable, because it's one thing the rules, and then another thing is that feeling of being comfortable and just that thought of, when will we all be happy to jump around in a sweaty mosh pit again with complete strangers and put our arms around them?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, but in a way, it's what's been interesting for me. I'll answer this in quite an expansive way. Is so my specialism really is systems change, interconnectedness, interdependence of systems. So, I'll be working on the relationship between, climate change and inequality and failures of the markets, all that kind of stuff. And what's really been interesting about the pandemic is it has given everybody a crash course in interdependence and systems change, because they've kind of seen suddenly all these things I didn't think were related are related. I'm seeing how dependent we are on each other. I'm suddenly very clearly seeing that the people who are the most important are the least well paid, and the people who are the least important often are the best paid, and that seems wrong. I'm seeing that us being told that having a functioning health service was too expensive turns out to be actually not the truth at all, etc., etc., etc. And also we've all been sort of separated, and we've suddenly begun to realise just how much we need that. People that were arguing about Brexit, a year ago are now taking each other food parcels if they're isolated. So that means that sentiment has changed, really, in our view of what the human condition is, and it's changed worldwide for a lot of people, not for everybody, but for a lot of people. And that gives me a great deal of hope, because we have seen some truths. There's a great quote from Philip K. Dick, who is the science fiction author who wrote the book that became Blade Runner, famously. And one of his great quotes is, "Reality is that which when you stop believing in it doesn't go away." And suddenly we've seen a whole bunch of reality sort of shown to us that had been sort of obscured by various political or commercial agendas. What's been fascinating about that is that people are now much more willing to entertain things that might have seemed impossible previously, in terms of A, who they'll hang out with, B, the sort of bold policy or commercial decisions they'll make. So to give you an example, I've got a client that went into the pandemic, and went from 20 million revenues a week to zero. Me and my good friend Ed Gillespie worked with them, and they've come out of the pandemic committing to being the first regenerative organisation in their sector. Similarly, with the MOD, the idea of trying to get militaries to do a joint declaration on climate change and cooperate with each other, which is what I was trying to push to them before, that is now in action. And I'm absolutely convinced that's because this window of what is now possible has opened up, and what we can do together has been opened up, and our ability to do it together. Whilst in the moment, it's actually quite, all those things you talked about, I think it's also given us this new perspective on who we are and what we can do and what's really important. So the 2008 crisis, people talked about that was the last crisis, but that was just a crisis of the intellect and numbers. Okay, this is a crisis of the soul and the heart. And that, I think, longer term could lead to a real reassessment of who we are and what we want. I mean, when you think about it, 85% of employees, back to our point about purpose and whatever, 85% of employees did not like their job. And they've all just been sent home, a lot of them, to spend time with their families and think about that. And then they're going back and going, do I really want to do this? And now a lot of people won't have had that revelation, be very happy to go back to the job they had and be employed and have some colleagues. But a massive proportion of them are, and I'm sure you've come across them, are thinking, this is different. There's something that's changed. And the other good thing about it is that what I'm saying to a lot of my clients, whether it's government clients or NGO clients or corporate clients, is there's never going to be a moment in your lifetime, in your history, where the impossible is possible. This is an absolutely unique moment where you can push for that radical agenda on what we need to do about climate change or social justice or whatever, because the cracks have opened up and you can start to push things through. And, Ed and I have had a number of successes already doing that. Not saying it's all going to be brilliant, but certainly there's that possibility there to make radical change. And I have this, excuse the profanity, but I have this rule I live by, which is fear is hard, but regret is a fucker. And if you don't, I know it's going to be difficult and hard to do, but if you don't do it now, you'll think there was that moment where sentiment changed, where the story of the future was definitely up for grabs and accessible to a whole bunch of people who may not have had their hands on it previously. And we've got to push that through, and that will, take us, we might get another 2 or 3 degrees towards a better future than if we hadn't taken that opportunity. Sorry, that's a very long answer. I can't remember the question now.
It's all good. Perfect answer. Thank you. I don't know the question either. So we talk a lot on this show about systemic change. And one of the things that always comes through from that is, how does an individual, a person, a human, find their part within systemic change? And how do you know if you're doing enough? And how do you know if it's doing anything?
Well, I think the first thing is to probably let go of worrying about that. Yeah. So one of my favorite quotes on this is from Gandhi. Of course, the classic systems change cliche quote. And I'm sure many people quoted it on this podcast before, but he said this rather thing, which is, what you do will be insignificant, but it's really important that you do it. And I think that really helps me. The other great quote of is, be the change you want to be in the world. You can have a difference, but of course you're one person. And I work with, ministries and governments and, very supposedly powerful CEOs and investors, who've got big, and their ability to influence the world is actually quite tiny as well. So we're all tiny. So the point is, what are the values you live by? And are you going to be part of that value systems change? And are you basically thinking about a more equitable, sustainable, humane and just world? And what are you doing about that? And what you do will be insignificant, absolutely. But it's really important that you do it and take some pride from doing it. Stop worrying and just get doing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I got to, having found, like, when I was really, really involved in the worlds of sustainability and social change, that there's often a sense of, oh yeah, but if you do that, you're creating this problem, this problem, this problem. And if you do that, it's not really doing what you think it's doing. And so often there's so much complexity and also criticism that then the best intentions kind of fall flat. As somebody that, in those days, I was in my 20s and I really wanted to, I was on a quest to find the way to make a difference. And so, I tried mainstream politics, I tried like the different movements of change and different projects. I'd found that really disheartening, that every kind of action that felt aligned for me had consequences that were not perfect, right? And I found that over the last 5 years, I've been through a big process of letting that go, coming back to the notion that as a human, all we can do is really tune into, like, what are our values, and like keep our minds open to the different possibilities, because there is always new information coming in, there's always new technology coming in, different ways of seeing things, and stay connected to that and then do what feels aligned, like in the moment. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that and how you kind of navigate making choices in an imperfect system?
So making the future better is a contact sport. And in any contact sport, you're going to get hurt. Okay? That's the nature of the game. And far too many people are very willing to talk about it and not get their hands dirty. And when they do get their hands dirty, they're not really happy to accept the consequences of getting their hands dirty, which is sometimes they make a mistake or they have to learn something painful. And therefore they stop and they become critics of anybody who's trying to do something. And that's not particularly useful for me. I mean, I really like Amelia Earhart's quote, which is never interrupt somebody doing something you said was impossible. And you're never going to get it right. You know, it's Ed and I, for instance, who with this kind of little anti-consulting group called the Futurenauts. You know, he always quotes, I think it's Jonathan Porritt saying, you know, we all suck with the devil, but some of us do it with a very long spoon. So you're always going to have to talk with people and work with people that you disagree with. And sometimes something you do is going to have an unintended and not great consequence. The question is, do you learn from that and move on? And do you increase your understanding of systems? And do you increase your understanding of empathy? And do you increase your understanding of how other people think? Or do you sit back and criticize people who are doing that? And I think it doesn't take a genius with us, which is the most useful approach, which is get on and do it again and again. I use a lot of analogies with fitness, actually, since I've started getting myself super fit. And that's been 5 years now that I've been working out in various ways, shape or form. You know, there were things I just couldn't physically do. Couldn't do a pull-up when I started, you know, now I can do stacks of pull-ups. You know, but there's all sorts of things you have to do to be able to get there, and all sorts of strengths you have to get. And it's not just the big muscles, it's the interconnecting muscles, and there's the stamina, and there's the diet. And my diet was terrible, and my fitness was terrible, and I was fat, and all those kind of things. And it's taken me 5 years to get into what I think is a fairly good shape for a 49-year-old. And, you know, but if I'd have sat there and said, oh, well, you know, if you do that, you might get injured. Or if you do that, that might not work, or that may be the wrong diet choice. I've never learned anything. So you just have to keep going. And I think one of the things you learn from fitness is that it's the workouts you do that you actually don't want to do. It's just turning up and doing it again and again and again and again, that are the ones that really count. Not because they're necessarily the ones that give you the biggest muscle growth or the biggest, you know, cardiovascular boost or whatever. It's because they're the ones that say, I'm in this for the long game. I'm just going to do it. It's just habitual. I'm going to try and make the world a better place. And I might fail some days, but on balance, hopefully, I'll get most of it right. And if most of us do that, and on balance, we get most of it right, then, you know, we'll have a slightly better world than the one we've got. It's just, what was it? I don't know. I can't remember who said it, but, you know, so they said 90% success is just turning up. Just keep going.
For sure. And so on a individual level, would you say it's around keeping on looking at all of the choices that you're making and seeing if any of them can be better in terms of what they're contributing to?
Yeah, and just keep doing it. And sometimes you'll go, oh, that was a terrible choice. Great, I learned that. Do something rather than do nothing. And eventually you'll increase your sphere of understanding. You'll increase your understanding of the systems around you. You'll increase your feeling of agency. And you'll also infect people around you with that as well. So, as I say, but don't give yourself a massively hard time for not being perfect. because if you did that, you wouldn't do anything, and that just plays into the bad outcome.
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot of people that I've been connecting to that are really rethinking at the moment, you know, where do I want to live? Who do I want to live near? What food do I want to eat? All of these quite basic things that like form our lives, especially with going through this experience of having all of the kind of mass choice taken away. And then realizing like, well, what am I really contributing to here? And how can I make the life that I'm living here feel completely interconnected and also be a life I don't need to take holidays from?
Yes, absolutely. Although even the life you don't need to take holidays from, you need to take holidays from, believe me.
Yeah, for sure. But the holidays can take different forms, right? The power of rest is a vital one.
Yes, and sleep is a really important one as well. You have to get good quality sleep, which is hard if you have young children, but you should, you know, I've taken to going to bed sometimes quite early because I know I'm going to be woken up at 5 a.m. by my little list. So sleep is really, really important as well for your mental health. Sleep, exercise, good diet. I mean, it's not rocket science, is it? You know, keep yourself in, be kind. I mean, I think actually what you can do is be kind to yourself first and foremost. And learning to do that is not easy, actually. Learn to be kind to yourself, to look after yourself, to be your own best friend, to look out for yourself is something that I think most of us find very, very difficult. And learning to value yourself, be kind to yourself, keep yourself in good shape, keep yourself healthy is a long, long, long journey. And when you've got that, it becomes much easier to do it for the rest of the world and other people. Don't try and replace being kind to yourself by being kind to other people. Make sure you're being kind to yourself too. And in that process, you're learning about a really interesting system, which is yourself and how it works and all its contradictions and whatever. And that self-awareness brings you, I think, into a space where you can be more aware about the rest of the world as well. I don't know, I've just made that up. It sounds quite convincing. I could probably write a book about that.
It's sounding quite like a spiritual book, Mark. We've got self-awareness. We've got, this is a time of the heart and the soul.
Yes. Okay. Well, there we go. Done. I'll write that.
Because you mentioned that you mentor people into kind of finding their ways into different work. For those that are feeling kind of unsatisfied with the jobs that they have and working kind of within corporations that they feel are not getting this memo about seizing the opportunity to create a different world, how do you recommend that people actually find roles or create roles that allow them to do this work that we know is so needed? Well,
I think you have to learn how to lose. That's the really important thing. And I'll explain what I mean by that, is that a lot of people have these ideas and they give up very quickly. They don't think they've given up quickly. They think they've given it their best shot, but they give it far too soon. So I use this thing I call the rule of 10, really, which is if you've got a new idea or you've got a real desire to change the organization that you work in to be more sustainable, ethical, humane, just, or whatever, or even just more efficient or a nicer place to work or whatever it is, if you walk into a room and you've got 10 people to convince, 9 of them are going to tell you to get lost, because they'll say, well, there's a reason we do things the way we do things. It's not your job to think about that. And can you get back to what we pay you for, which is doing what you did last year, but with a bit more margin? And that's quite debilitating. But one person comes around. This is the person your mate, the person you go drinking with anyway. And you say, I don't understand why my friends and colleagues didn't really give that idea a bit more. Because I know they're nice people. Surely they want the space to be more ethical, humane, sustainable, just. And then you think it's your fault. You think it's a marketing problem. So you think, I just need to rephrase it. So you go back into that room of 10 people again. One more person comes around. But the other 8 are still saying, get lost. You still think it's a marketing problem. You do it again for a third time. 7 out of 10 people deserve to get lost. And then you stop and then you give up. I see this all the time. I used to do this all the time. You give up because you've probably been bashing on about this for about 6 months, a year.
And then you're being labelled a troublemaker.
You're being labelled a bit of a troublemaker. And, quite rationally, 70% of the people you like and trust, who know your business that you work in, your friends, your colleagues, any professional group you're in, 70% of them are telling you after all this time, it's probably not a good idea. So you've started to believe them. And you can put this to bed with a clear conscience. Well, I gave it my best shot. I'm probably going to stop now because it looks like I might lose my job if I carry on making trouble. What I always say to people is that's never the time to give up. That's just a score. And all it says is round 3. And you have to get to round 5. But the rule is, if you're not prepared to lose more often than you win until halfway through the game, you'll never change anything. And so if I think about my own, what I laughingly call a career, people like Ed Gillespie and me were wandering into, investors 10 or 15 years ago going, you've got to take climate change seriously. You've got to start working out how to work out what the carbon intensity of your portfolio is. You've got, otherwise there'll be nothing, And we would be laughed out of court and shown the door 9 times out of 10. Now, investors are asking us in to help them think about this kind of stuff. I actually got an inquiry on Friday about that. They're all scrabbling over each other to think about how they can do this. BlackRock, the biggest investor, which, I've spoken to a number of times, they've been in there for 10 years saying you need to take it seriously. Have just said, if you're not going to take climate risk properly, we won't be investing in you. And we're moving $7 trillion over to a sustainable development ticket. But I could have easily given up at any point. So you have to lose. And you have to be comfortable losing. And my view, it's a bit like fitness again. Are you a little bit stronger than you were last week? Not have you got to where you want to go. And I was just thinking, this week I got kicked in the nuts 6 times out of 10. Whereas last week I was getting kicked in the nuts 7 times out of 10. So even so, I'm still getting mostly kicked in the nuts, which is not great. I'm getting nuts slightly less. And therefore I should, I'm going to have a glass of wine. And next week I'll go back out again and hopefully I'll get to being kicked in the nuts 5 times out of 10. And then when it shifts, but you have to learn to lose. And a lot of people don't have that. And what they'll also do is they'll then become cynical. They'll say, well, I've tried it and it's failed. And all cynicism is obedience to the status quo. It's dressing up actual laziness as wisdom. And I've got no time for that. I'm more for skepticism, but cynicism can do one as well as I'm concerned.
Yeah. So the wine and the early morning fitness routines are really like the cornerstone of what makes it all possible.
I think there's a balance there, isn't there? A really nice rioja and an incredibly intense weights workout, either end of the day. Now you are. then do that. I'm not sure that's a recipe that really works.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the exercise teaches you resilience, right? And it also teaches you potential and possibility, like within your own self. And then, of course, all the endorphins and everything else that you then have in your body, and the energy that you have available to you, and the fact that when you're working out, you just want different food. It's like you do that bit of effort, and then a lot of the other effort disappears, because suddenly you do want to drink water, and you don't want to eat that thing. You're craving something that's got high protein, and it just happens that way.
I think fitness teaches you progression, which I really like. It teaches you slow, consistent progression, that you just turn up, you do it again, and you look back and you think, bloody hell, I couldn't do that. I did my eldest boy's 4.5. We now do press-ups with him on my back, and we see how many we can do. And I can do quite a good number of press-ups with, I don't know, whatever it is, 35 kilograms on my back. Probably couldn't do one press-up 5 years ago. On a very physical and visceral level, it teaches you that you can do things that were impossible for you previously. And I'm a middle-aged man. I'm going to be 50 next birthday, and I'm stronger and fitter than I've ever been. If I can do that, then it means I can also get stronger and fitter in the work I do. So it teaches you just that constant turning up, doing it, and at some point you look back and go, bloody hell. Whereas you don't notice it day to day, but it just teaches you to keep going.
And you started getting fit around 5 years ago, so 45-ish, like 44, 45.
No, it's because I had our first child. It's like, yeah. Oh my God, that thing moves fast. I have to get fit.
Yeah, but others would say, well, now I'm running around after children, I don't have time to do the exercise. So it's all just a matter of like perspective. And I think what's really interesting is that what you're saying shows that it's never too late, and that you can always find the time or find the resources that you need for what is important.
And the other thing about fitness is you will have off weeks. You will have bad weeks. You'll go out with your friends and drink far too much one night and feel absolutely awful the next day and not do your workout. And, but that's okay. The other thing I've learned is when you fall off, that's okay. Because in general, it's going in the right direction. So it's okay to also have a massive failure or a little failure and just go, well, okay, so I didn't do it. That's all right. Tomorrow, I'm just going to start again. And that's quite a useful technique as well, I think, learning that on a big journey, you can have all sorts of failures along the way, and don't let them derail you. You just get back up and do it again. There's a song, or a phrase that says, failure is not falling down, it's staying down. And I think fitness again teaches you that.
Right. I just want to go and, work out now from this conversation. It's not what I was expecting.
Good. I'm glad. I mean, yeah, it is a good feeling. That thing you said, it's never too late. One of my favourite Chinese proverbs is, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. And I really like that. It's kind of like, okay. Because people go, oh, if I should have done this, should have got fit in my 20s or whatever, or blah, blah, it's too late. It's like, no, it's not. Go and plant a tree. Go and do it. Go and do it now. You can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you most excited and interested by in terms of like new technologies and interesting developments that could change the outcomes around climate change?
Well, A, I don't do most or favourites because I think they're false choices. And B, whilst I'm a big fan of the power of technology, I'm not necessarily seeing technology as the answer. So the answer is really we need to ask ourselves different questions as societies about who we are and what we want. And then we can use the technologies to help us answer those questions. But too many I get called a futurist, which I don't like. Too many futurists will say, don't worry, solar power will save us, or wind power will save us, or some carbon scrubbing technology that hasn't been invented for us yet. So the thing that excites me the most at the moment is the sort of conversations I'm having with very unexpected partners. So like, I'm on the expert panel for climate change for the MOD, for instance, and I'm working with them, and have interesting conversations with the Department of Defense in America about climate change and national security. Big investors really starting to get it. As this client I mentioned, big, massive corporate client coming out of the pandemic saying, we've got to be regenerative, both socially, so we put more back into the communities that we work in than we took out, and environmentally. That excites me. because I think finally, and it's late and we're on a knife edge, but I think finally people have really woken up to it. And it's people who've got a lot of capability to do stuff about it. There's another equation I work by, which is legitimacy plus capability equals action. So a lot of people have legitimate concerns about inequality of the future or whatever, but sometimes they feel they don't have much capability. And so it's like, well, how can you be the plus then between legitimate concerns and what can you do? And that's what employees can do. I have legitimate concerns. Actually, in my day job, if enough of us stop making a noise, we can turn some of this capability that this organisation has into action. And I'm seeing a lot of that happening now. I worry that some of it might be too late. I kind of feel on the climate change thing, the human race is a bit like the smoker who's just been given the lung cancer diagnosis and has decided to quit. It's like, well, that's good. Still have lung cancer. So this is going to be a rocky road. We've got a lot of chemotherapy to do, sort of morally, ethically, systemically, whatever, but we might get there. So I'm excited by the fact that I can now have very detailed, nuanced, informed conversations about systemic risk, climate change, and its links to things like inequality, social justice, all that kind of stuff, with, for instance, 4 or 5 star generals, and they get it. And that, I think, I would never have guessed that 10 years ago. So that's good.
Yeah, I heard Tom Chi speak recently about the work that he's doing around drones and tree planting, and they've engineered this new system which means you can plant trees at like really mass scale very quickly. I found it kind of amazing that for the cost of the US military budget for 1 year, through this technology, enough trees could be planted quick enough to basically end our global climate problem, which I find amazing that that's possible.
Yeah, it's sort of possible. It's simplistic because you have to plant the right trees in the right places.
Yeah, and they're not, they've been developing this for 5 years and they're not just like planting any trees.
Planting trees might be one of the projects that we try and get various militaries to cooperate on, because it doesn't really operationally in terms of their other arguments with each other, but they can all coordinate on that and share expertise on doing that with drones and whatever. So yes, but the thing is that technology, which is great, is not going to do much unless we have the systemic understanding and the coordination between governments and civil society and corporations and our own households that we need, which is why I guess you and me are in this business of, also doing cultural shifts.
Yeah, exactly. Because they've developed this technology and it's working and they have clients and things are happening. But in order to be using it at the scale that would really make a difference, they need people to be putting budgets towards it and deciding that that's important. And obviously all of that comes from these cultural systemic shifts that happen inside of each of us, as well as in each household, each organization, each workplace. So what I'm finding interesting about that when I was listening to Tom Chi at the weekend was that I had been in a space where I kind of felt like it's too late to really do anything, but we still have to keep trying and make it, I guess, like as prolonged as possible, and within it be living our lives in a way of joy and connection and in service of what's possible. With that, I do find it really exciting that there are engineers and such that are developing tools, which mean that as that happens, there could be shifts bigger than we imagine, which means that the end story is not yet written.
Indeed. You've still got the thermodynamics to play out, of course. But let's not go into ocean.
Yeah.
Now.
And there's probably some engineers sitting somewhere working on that.
I supervised a PhD on it.
Hello. We're taking a short pause from the conversation. On behalf of our team and our community, thank you for being here and co-creating The Future is Beautiful. Much dedication, love, and time goes into the production of this show. We believe in being advertising free in a world that's always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. And so we make this show with you and for you, thanks to your support. There are 3 ways you can be more involved, so we can share the vision, wisdom, and creativity here as we explore what it means to be a human in this time. You can support the podcast by sharing it with your friends, posting episodes on social media, and doing iTunes reviews. You can support as a patron by making a monthly or one-off donation of your choice. And with this, you join the Global Patrons group and monthly video calls where we share connection and insight. You get to know the other amazing patrons from around the world, their stories and their work, and you offer direct support to me and the team, as well as being brought into the behind the scenes of creating something like this. It sounds like a lot, but it's as much or as little as you want to get involved in. You can become a member of Presence, our membership collective of care and practice, where we explore how to embody the themes of the podcast with workshops, calls, special events, tree whispers, and powerful tools, practices, and rituals that you can bring into your life. This is open to absolutely everybody as we create an inclusive and diverse space that celebrates well-being as a human right, where we explore together what it means to be creative, courageous, and connected to ourselves, each other, and the earth. This is about embodying sacred activism. We love meeting patrons and Presence members, and how being part in this way weaves our lives together, as well as making this show possible. If anything from this conversation has moved or inspired you, please get more involved. All information can be found at www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community. This show really can't go on without your patronage and Presence membership, so please do make it happen. And now, back to the conversation.
Mark, what is the difference between a futurist and a futurnaut?
So don't really like the term futurist, don't really like futurism or futurology as a profession, fairly shabby history associated with prediction. Human beings make predictions very badly because they tend to predict things that are emotionally or financially convenient for them, or the people who are paying them to make them, too stuck in their own rivers of thinking or the frame of reference they grew up in. Very much techno-optimist, a lot of it. And very few futurists in my experience have any kind of real understanding of how we got to where we are. They don't really understand the roots of inequality. They don't really necessarily understand why markets price risk badly and all that kind of stuff. They don't. So I find the profession slightly unseemly. There's some notable exceptions. There's a couple of really great people that I do rate, but so I don't really like being called a futurist because of all those associations. And so Ed and I were trying to basically come up. Ed Gillespie would just be trying to come up with something that explained what we did do. And we couldn't do that, but we came up with futurnaut, which is basically the idea that we are sailing into the future. We're sailing into these winds of change, and we're trying to navigate them by being literate about what's going on around us, rather than saying that's what's going to happen over there. You have to prepare. It's more like we are on a journey, and this is how we're going to sail into it in perhaps the best way we can, given that we don't quite know what's coming. But let's be as prepared as possible. So it's about sailing into the future with an informed, open, systemic view, rather than trying to predict what the future will be and then prepare for it. Because I think one is passive, whereas the other is active, and I'd much rather be active. So a futurnaut is somebody who sails close to the winds of change, as Ed would say.
Beautiful. Ed's been on this show, so everyone is familiar with him. Yeah, I like that. I mean, when I think of a futurist, again, I'm not a big person for labels, but I get given them. And then we've been exploring this term of cultural futurism, and what I like about it is a definition that is more about creating the culture of the future rather than saying this is what's going to happen. That to me is not even what I associate with the term, but it's always interesting where these terms come from. And they do tend to come from the market and the men sitting in the room making decisions and saying this will be the future.
Yeah. What I like to do with my clients, what Ed and I try to say, we're trying to make them future literate, which is understand the questions the future is asking you and then work out what you're going to do to answer those questions well. Not this is what the future is going to be like and here's how you prepare for your own personal or financial or emotional advantage. It's not about how do you play the game, it's about how do you make the game.
Beautiful. That's very powerful. And I feel like it's a question that anyone listening can ask themselves in the context of their own lives as well as their work environments.
Also, I think it's the only sensible way to approach it, because as we see from the history of futurism, nearly every single prediction ever made was wrong. And the reason for that is because the world is too complex. because the first order effects of, say, a new technology or idea hitting the world are often easy to predict. Like there's plenty of people who'll tell you, okay, where will the solar power market be 5 years from now, and how efficient will solar panels be, and how efficient will batteries be, for instance. You can kind of do that kind of stuff. But how that plays out in society, nobody can predict. So to give you an example, when the internet arrives, first order effect of the internet is email. Makes perfect sense. Computers are now connected. People are going to send messages because people sit at a computer. Okay. Nobody predicted social media. Nobody then, and then from that predicts how social media might affect the democratic process and undermine it. So this idea that with some understanding of technology trends, you can predict what society is going to be like is ridiculous. What you need to be is say, okay, given what's happening, how are we going to make sure when these things happen, we are doing our best to make the world more sustainable, equitable, humane, or just?
Yeah. I prefer, if I'm going to listen to predictions, I prefer to listen to like Indigenous prophecies. They seem to be more accurate and be able to give us some kind of guideline of where we're going and what's happening on a bigger scale.
A lot of Indigenous thinking, and not all of it, but lots of it is very much rooted in sort of, are you being a good ancestor? So thinking about generationally, how will this play out? And also feeling a connection back a number of generations. Roman Krasnaric has just written a really brilliant book on this called The Good Ancestor, which is about that kind of generational thinking. And I've been trying to embed it in actually some of my clients. I've just been working with a client this week, and they're going to take it on as like everything we do, we're now going to wonder whether we're being good ancestors or not, which is quite nice.
Who wrote that book? Sorry, I didn't catch the name.
Roman Krasnaric. So he's a philosopher, I guess, and he wrote Carpe Diem, about seizing the day. He was the guy behind the Empathy Museum. You should have him on. He's a fascinating and brilliant and very kind man. And also he's in this amazing power couple because his wife is Kate Rayworth, who is the lady behind donut economics, which I think is one of the most interesting ways of thinking about 21st century economics as well.
Absolutely.
I say, what's it like around your dinner table? And say, it's the same as ever. We're just talking about who hasn't eaten their pasta. Something also very, when you've got this amazing sort of, one's a philosopher, one's an economist, both at the top of their game, and you realize that they also, do a HIIT workout every morning and have to get the kids to school and have to get their kids to eat their vegetables. That's also quite grounding.
They also do HIIT workouts. So this is the...
Put them onto them. I put them onto them. I said, you've got to be doing HIIT workouts in the morning. So.
Yeah, it's good timing, this conversation, because I'm living with my mum at the moment, and I've been feeling like, whilst I'm here, I need to get a personal trainer. And I've just 2 days ago made an inquiry to a personal trainer. And so now you're talking to me and I'm like, yes, okay. I'm really looking forward to it now.
Excellent.
Yeah, because I've been finding, I love yoga, but I've been finding that I've been missing that sort of the sweating and the whole cardio aspect that you don't get from yoga.
Yeah, and just be able to push yourself. I mean, yoga pushes you in one way, but cardio stuff and weight stuff pushes you in a different way. And it's good. It's a good push. If I want to go and play sport for 2 hours, I can play sport for 2 hours. I'd be quite happy to play another 2, which is great. Whereas, let's say 5 years ago, I would have been knackered after 5 minutes. I like that feeling.
Yeah, we've had this question about being a good ancestor come up many times on this show. And that notion of, what is it that we're leaving for the future, and how are we honoring what we've been given and what's gone before us in order for us to be here now?
I mean, the thing is that a lot of people don't think that way and don't feel that way. And actually, why should they? Because on the one hand, a lot of popular spiritual thoughts, but you must live in the now. You must live in the moment. You must, because that's all you have, so you must fully exist in the moment. So then also simultaneously being asked to think about the past and the future is quite hard. And consumerism teaches you to just think about instant gratification and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I try and do in my systems work is try and think of proxies for the future. So get something that people will do now that's also good for the future. What's the thing they will do at the moment that they will do because it gives them some gratification or reward now that actually is also good for the long-term, project. One of the ways I do this is what I call a participation virus, which is how do you create something people will do anyway, but it replicates something that you want to happen. The best example of a participation virus is sex. So Mother Nature, the genetic material, basically wants to propagate, so it makes sex enjoyable. most of us would do it anyway. I've got 2 kids. I don't want any more, but I do hope I'm going to have sex again because I quite enjoy it, and I hope my wife feels the same. So you do it anyway. But what happens is and consumerism did that for a while. They tried to tell us that shopping was in itself an enjoyable thing. The social networks do it. They know how to get that dopamine hit. That means that actually the clicking of the thing that starts the ad, we find in some way enjoyable. So it gets what they want. So you must always be thinking like, what is the participation virus? What is the thing people will do anyway but replicates a good thing, that makes a good thing more and more likely to happen? And I think we've got a lot to learn on that. But again, that's why the arts come in so handy. People will go to a gig, they will go to a pub, they'll go to a comedy gig or whatever. And there's a lot to be learned from how artists engage people emotionally to do something that might propagate a new thought or a new way of acting or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. The arts can be such a powerful tool for connecting us to that space in our hearts from which the possibility blooms, and then from there it's like we're able to kind of understand things differently. Or for me that happened a lot. Like in my early activism days, I was always like, oh, but when you listen to this song and then you just get it, try and read a report or whatever, but it's like the song is the thing that's going to make you kind of go, oh yes, now I can feel that now. I get it. I know what that means. And I'm going to change the way that I look at that thing. I'm going to change the way that I live around that particular thing. And it's so powerful.
It's also surprising though how many arts organisations don't really get it and don't really live it properly and run their organisations as if it's still 1970 and still won't engage in the systemic stuff. And also there's a whole cadre of artists who just think by being an artist they're somehow saving the world, whereas often what they're doing is largely pointless. My wife works in the arts. She's a producer, works with some very high-ranking artists. One of the things that she told me, I think a colleague of hers said, was like, if I'm looking at an arts project, my question is, could you have taken the money and planted trees and done more good? Because if you could, then there's really no point in doing it. I think there's a lot of arrogance in artists that think that we're just making the world better by being artists. They can be as illiterate as, a fossil fuel company CEO, but somehow seem to claim that because they're, making a horrible sculpture that it's somehow going to change the planet. Sorry, that's a bit of a rant, but I do get annoyed with, that kind of, oh, well, I'm so spiritual and arty and whatever. It's like, yeah, but you're not literate about the problem. So you're just as bad as the people on the other side who aren't literate about it. But you think you've got to get out of course for not doing anything and indulging yourself. Sorry, bit of a rant.
It's okay. Rants are allowed. This is a time now where everything has to be geared around understanding this time that we're living in and the very real challenges that we have. And we, as humans, have all of these amazing ways in which to contribute, be it in art, be it in the way that we are in our relationships, be it in the choices that we make around what items we bring into our house, what we buy, what we eat, all of that. And even just the ways in which we communicate. And so it feels very much that if everything isn't really centered around understanding the issues of the time, that it has got to a point of being pointless. And I'm somebody that's found a lot of that stuff pointless 15 years ago because I felt a very real understanding of what the issues that we were facing already were. But I think now in 2020, there's really that opportunity around looking at absolutely everything that we do, everything in our lives, and running it through those values of how it can bring us into deeper connection and also address the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, I mean, the practical step I would nuance that with is to say, every one of us can look around and say, well, we should be doing more of this, that, and the other. You can try it for a bit and then you generally fall off the wagon. It's a bit like, again, back to fitness. You can kind of think, oh, really shouldn't eat that pizza. I have that beer. And then you go, but I want it, and I have it, and you have it, and you feel awful. So one of the rules I live by is like, yes, we've got to move in this positive direction. You've got to start putting everything through this lens. Just try and be 1% better next week than you were this week. Just 1%. Doesn't you don't have to have a wholesale rule invasion. You have to, if you're a big meat eater, just have meat, a little bit less meat, or one breakfast without meat this week. That's all you have to do. That's it. That's all you have to do. And then the week after, do 1% better than that. And the week after, be 1% better than that. And that's far more sustainable and achievable in the long term than trying to reinvent your entire lifestyle because you suddenly feel guilty about it. You can't do that. It's impossible. The human brain doesn't work that way. Pick one thing, be 1% better at it this week, 1% the week after. And then in a year's time, you'll look back and go, wow, that's interesting. I'll become a vegetarian. How did that?
Yeah, a lot can happen once we've sort of made ourselves aware of what it is that we want to change. It doesn't have to always be a very focused attention on it, because once we sort of made that commitment, some part of the subconscious, and we're taking steps towards it, a lot can happen. And like you say, people do find themselves to suddenly be vegetarians or to suddenly be fitness enthusiasts.
Well, it's just a lot easier that way. When I started doing my proper training, I would do like a couple of press ups a day, and that would be it from doing none. It's like I did 2 press ups a day. Well, that's better than none, which I did last week. Because at one point I was doing sort of thousands of them a week just to see if I could. So it is that just 1% better, 1% better next week. And don't beat yourself up if one week you fall back by 5%, because you've been doing it for 10 weeks, you're still 5% ahead. And the week after you'll go back to it. Just keep going.
Well, and also, isn't the importance of resting as well, so that it doesn't become like a kind of a cycle where you're kind of haranguing yourself into doing something? Because I often find as well, when you rest, I mean, from a fitness point, that can be good for your body, but also then you maybe miss it and you're like, oh, I miss that. That's a nice reframe.
I think I've found this with parenting recently. I've been using this fitness analogy quite a lot with parenting, because, lockdown certainly taught me that I was not nearly as patient a parent or indeed husband as I thought I was. I was finding myself getting quite irate and short and difficult to be around. So I thought I've got to do some work on that. But, what I've realized with parenting is that, of course, I'm going to get it wrong a lot of the time, because nobody gives you a manual for that stuff. And suddenly you've got these humans to deal with. And the idea that you should be some perfect parent, which is what we're kind of told, and you should, always do the right thing and blah, blah, is, it's impossible. And then you do something bad, you're a bit short with your kids or, whatever. And you feel terrible, you feel awful. You feel like, I'm just an awful human being, a terrible parent. I can't believe I let me become a parent. It's awful, I'm dreadful. And then what I've started to realize is like, well, if I got something wrong or didn't come it right, or I managed that situation badly, then that's just training. And I just have to reflect on it and go back in and do it a bit better next week. And it still might be right. But, in a year's time, I'll know how to handle that situation. I'll be a better parent than if I just sat here and beat myself up and told I was a horrible person. So it's that progression again, in everything. And that tendency to beat yourself up is, sometimes you need to, obviously, if you've done something really bad. But that tendency to beat yourself up and then not change because you just think you're awful and you can't improve is actually worse, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground during this conversation. And I feel like what we're giving our lovely friends listening to take away is to get fit and to do 1% every day and to live by values.
Yes. Who was it that said, I can't remember, but they were the Chancellor of the University of Notre Dame, and they're also a priest. And the name escapes me. But they do say that any kind of leadership, whether that's leading yourself or leading other people, you need to have some kind of vision, a set of where you're heading for, a set of values at least, some kind of, this is what we're about. Because he says you cannot blow an uncertain trumpet, which I quite like. So you need to know at least, what your values are, and what you stand for and what you believe. And you can get it wrong day in, day out, trying to live up to those values or whatever. But over time, you will get better, at least if you at least know roughly where you're heading. It doesn't have to be a physical destination or a financial destination or whatever. It can just be, this is my compass, and I believe in a more sustainable world, or I believe in being kind to people. And I know that sometimes I'm not going to be kind to people because we're all human and we get tired or whatever. But that is at least my direction that I'm heading. And therefore, you can start to blow that trumpet with more and more confidence until you're playing a fantastic, tune 10 years later. Like you are, of course, Amisha.
Yeah, well, I definitely have moments with my trumpet.
I think we all have moments with our trumpet, and that's a phrase you didn't think you'd be saying when you started this podcast today.
No, and for some reason the image that I have in my head is like bending the trumpet into like smashing the trumpet. But yeah, I think we all have these moments, but then it does help to be able to come back to a sense of purpose and vision. And to remember that in all of the challenges and the fails, as you mentioned, the different rounds that we go through, that when we are true to that vision that we're holding, that set of values, that even if things seem to be like failing in the kind of physical like outcome realms, like that they're not failing in terms of us showing up for what we know to be true.
Yeah, you just got to show them. And I think, again, parenting is one of the things that teaches you that a bit as well, because it's not like you can have a terrible day parenting and wake up the next day and they go, well, it's all right, we've taken the kids off you, because I mean, in some situations they do, in very extreme situations, but you mean like, you still have to wake up the next day. It's like, oh, you're still here and I am still your father and I still have to have another go at this. So, that's one of the great things about kids. It just teaches you have to get back in the saddle and try again. My kids will eventually redeem me.
Thank you so much for your time, Mark. I'm going to let you get back to the military and our bigger climate possibilities. How can people find you and connect with you and listen to your podcast?
Yes, my Twitter handle is Optimist on Tour, and you can probably find everything from there. And I've also, me and Ed and the comedian John Richardson do a podcast called John Richardson and the Futurenauts, which is all about systems change and how to handle it. So that's quite a good place to start. And I've got a couple of books you can find on Amazon, all the usual stuff. So, but at Optimist on Tour is probably the best place to find me.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. That was great fun.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?